a year or so ago, Mr. Paul Coulam, fellow libertarian, bristled with hostility when I said libertarians can make a case for being egalitarian. He thought this was ridiculous, objectionable, bad PR, dreadful propaganda, and doubtful philosophically.
Yes.
So here I am to argue otherwise.
Because even the colleges do, I was going to say, even the colleges do think there's a trade-off between equality and...
Indeed they do. And all should be explained.
Liberty.
So, must or should a libertarian be an egalitarian? I assume you can use must or should interchangeably because the must will be a kind of moral or logical or intellectual compulsion. You won't be physically, must one be every libertarian being egalitarian, so it must be something to do with the arguments. And I think taking at least examining the egalitarian line can be very rewarding and interesting, and some people would like that kind of approach. So, for sales purposes, it's never to be dismissed, though that shouldn't be the first thing that one thinks of. So, should a libertarian be an egalitarian? Well, some would say, exactly 8 minutes. Yes and no. But I shall say no and yes.
Exactly the opposite of what people
Quite
say.
right. But before we get there, what makes a libertarian a libertarian? Well, some people think, opponents of libertarians for the most part, that it's a kind of clash of basic values. Libertarians like little boys dying up chimneys and people working 25 hours a day at the loom or something like that. Therefore, they rather rejoice in the absence of a welfare state and legislation and regulation and the rest of it. That just pleases. They like to see granite-jawed entrepreneurs of a John Galt kind. Is it John Galt?
Yes, indeed.
Doing great things. And, the rest of them can just rub along with that. And if you can hack it, you hack it. If you can't, you don't. And, well, you sort of deserve to go under. That is a caricature, of course. And I have met many libertarians who think that way at all. And I include myself. No, I have met myself. So, is it basic values that makes a libertarian a libertarian? I don't think a basic value makes many people anything apart from the sort of people who value that sort of thing. Perhaps basic values would. But you very often only value a thing, an implement, a formula, an institution, whatever it might be, because of what it's good for, what comes of it. This is a bit... please come in. Oh, we're not the global thingy. Well, I'm a global thingy, but it's my own fault.
Don't worry, we're not there.
He didn't look like what he could. Where was I? We'll wait for the chairman to come back. So what are basic values? Well, I don't know about you, but I think you're rather like me in this, that you don't much care for squalor and poverty and misery and ill health and early death and children dying at an early age. I don't rub my hands together and think, well, they didn't really give it an effort. They didn't try hard. They didn't go to the best schools. They had the right parents. They didn't live in a country that was wealthier than another country. No, I think there are very few people like that. Some people wish death to their enemies and even the children of their enemies, but that is to be deplored, and it's not. It's usually in response to some earlier atrocity by the other lot, thinking in the same way. But that is not a modern. Well, that is less and less part of the modern world. Let's hope. Although recent occurrences around the world might make you think otherwise. But certainly most libertarians I know don't have that as a basic value. They don't value the market order and a minimal or no state, in other words, a libertarian order, because it increases the amount of misery in the world. So we can discount that. So what is it? Well, it's not basic values at all. I think basic values are pretty much shared, apart from those that are instrumental values, and that depends upon what you think of the worth of various institutions, churches, ideologies, whatever it might be. So what is it then? Well, it's core beliefs. Now, how does a libertarian or anyone else come to their core beliefs? Well, we don't much think for ourselves, or if we do, we think in response to what others have thought before us. Therefore, it depends upon the theories, again, explanations, historical accounts and explanations that you have come across, that you've heard of. So you start as something. You always have to start as something. Probably a rather childish view, since you start being as something at an early age. But generally you adopt, or at least give an ear to and start with, the theories that are around you in the society in which you live. So it's these. However, given modern printing, and especially given the internet and other things, people have access to all sorts of other ideas. And some of them, they strike them as plausible, interesting, intriguing, utterly wrong, but I want to see what possible justification there can be for this. It can also work that way. So something that strikes you as preposterous can then be something you cleave to and argue for in later life. So it's theory, really. So you have to have a basic concern for yourself and others. It can be done through utter self-interest, if you must, but I don't think there are many people of that kind. I mean, there are souls with interests. I mean, even an altruistic saint has interests and a self. Therefore, will argue for certain things, seek certain things, strive for certain things, pay for certain things, because they have an interest. That doesn't make them necessarily greedy, although I have argued that altruism is selfishness on behalf of someone else. That's just shifted over. So the most selfless people in some ways can be the most murderous and stone-faced. Think of various French revolutionaries or Marxists or Leninists or whatever it might be. You can see the point. Although I think that's enjoyed it, so it was an extra. They got to kill people and reduce people. Anyway, that aside. So we make do with the theories we have and try to improve them or defend them, so whatever it might be. And that's how you get to be a libertarian. Very good. Facts and explanations that strike you, well, the facts strike you as true, and the explanations strike you as correct. What then? What then? Well, some will argue for having thought around the subject, with the help of others, that there are natural rights that you have, or ought to have, or you have whether they're respected or not, and that you argue for them being respected. That's fair enough, that's one way of doing it. It doesn't have to be that way. There can be a perfectly good consequentialist argument for the same set of rights, such that if they were honoured, if they were respected, then it would lead to a state of affairs likely to be more to your liking and then generating a greater happiness for the greater number. That can also be done. And when we come to the equal rights, especially with a consequentialist kind of view, the idea is, I think Bentham said this, that all are to count for one and none for more than one. In other words, you have to have institutions or rules such that it put the problems to one side about what happiness is and how you measure the thing, for goodness sakes. But you should have institutions that you think would maximise human happiness of the greater number. And then there are all sorts of problems here with utility monsters. How do we measure happiness? What if someone has an immense amount of happiness from ripping the heads off babies? We shan't bother with that here, you'll be pleased to know. But there is that way of doing it. But in that kind of Benthamite approach, and it's not simply Benthamite, but the idea is that your own happiness should weigh in the balance, but no more than anyone else's. And that all to count for one and none for more than one. In other words, you can, at the personal level, favour your family, your community, your country, in a way, with voluntary activities. You can hand them extra money if they haven't taken enough from you. You think you can work for them in various ways. But that's supererogatory, if I've got the word right. The only thing before that is our respect in the other things that make it more likely that all shall prosper mightily compared to any other arrangement. So, under that kind of an approach, there are rights, and all of to count for one, none for more than one. So that looks rather egalitarian, doesn't it? The happiness of the king doesn't count for any more, the happiness of a pauper shouldn't count for any more. That indeed looks like a kind of egalitarianism. But then, especially if the Benthamite is a classical liberal, he will see the good that comes of allowing people to work in pursuit of great incomes through great innovations and great industriousness, and he will care nothing for the fact that this person has more money, a greater income, and possibly even greater happiness. Because set in the wider scheme of things, everyone else is going to be gaining more than they would have done other ways. Now, so we have here already an obvious distinction between different kinds of egalitarian. Should everyone have the same rights or count for as much? Well, that looks egalitarian. Should we suck in our cheeks and widen our eyes at the thought that someone is earning X times the amount of someone else? No, but people plainly do, assuming they're earning this in a legitimate manner, without theft, fraud, and the rest of it. See crony capitalism, perhaps, later, or on another occasion. So we have a bundle of rights because of the consequences of having those rights, working with those rights, and etc. Very good. We'll leave government to one side for now. The levellers, so-called by their enemies, perhaps by themselves too, but for different reasons. Their enemies called them the levellers because they sought to drag down the hedges and the boundary markers between the states. And, by implication, they wished all incomes should be identical or as near as possible, and they wished to despoil the grand estates or to poach or to do whatever, or, in some cases, to have their ancestral rights honoured, because it used to be that people had the right to hunt to some extent, to gather firewood to some extent on the great lord's grounds, and they were now being told in the 17th century that they could not do such a thing. Also that the land might be drained to make fields. This is in the Fens, where Cromwell was, of course. And he sort of sided with some of those who objected to this, but eventually I think he probably went along with it because it meant more fields, more produce, better for everyone. But the levellers were levellers, but only as regards station and rights, not as regards income or wealth. They thought that there should be the vote for all men, Protestant men, not serving men. There were a list of exclusions, of course. Those in the army, though even the army, I think they did like to vote in the army, so we'll leave that to one side. But they certainly thought that there should be equality at that level. So, what is this equality doing here? Well, the equality is that all have the rights to use their property and their labour and contract with others, and what comes of it comes of it. But they were levellers also, not simply that we'd all start from the same place, that was not possible, but we'd all have the same rights, but they also wished to have nothing to do with an aristocracy, or at least an aristocracy with power, as the aristocracy did have. Parliament, there should be one level of Parliament quite possibly, well, certainly for the more radical ones, and that those who were sent to Parliament were sent there to be representatives, to pass on, to do as instructed. They were delegates, they were told what to do. They were not lords over the community. This is a very modern view, and it was very modern then, and it didn't go down too well, and in fact was not, obviously, it was not the way things went for a while, although their influence did continue, especially in America, of course. The levellers also objected to monopoly, station to some extent. That's why a serving man could not have the vote, because he would vote the way his master wished him to vote, or he might lose his position. One advantage in those days of the voting system was when you voted, when the man voted, he went to he signed the parish register and declared how he voted. Now, that being the case, it was worth bribing him, because you could make sure that he actually at least that next time round. So he wouldn't get anything until he saw that he had voted the right way. With a secret ballot, this was not possible. He might say he will vote for you, but how can one tell? Now, of course, this is all well and good, and back in the 17th century, or whenever it was, but there are those who will argue that the voting should be for everyone, every adult, men and women, and the whole point in politics is to get equality. However, we thought we had equality, at least of rights. Voting, no, but of rights, well, not to actually the late 19th century, was equal property rules for all, I believe. The Married Women's Property Act came in, and that was when von Mises thought everything's about hunky-dory. You can leave things alone after that piece of legislation. So the idea is that politics has to intervene, even though we now have equal rights. Now, of course, a libertarian would say if there is some ancient wrong or some recent wrong to be redressed as regards theft, damage, injury, encroachment, some tort or other, well, yes, there should be recourse to law. But there should not need to be recourse to politics. Politics is, well, it's anti the rights they believed in. The whole point in politics is to violate rights, property rights, rights of person, rights to freely contract one with another. That is what politics is, unless it's undoing various burning, turfing out, ripping up various statutes that should not be there. So the liberals of the 19th century thought once everyone had the vote and education, sadly they believed in municipal and national education. We've argued often as to why they thought this would be a good idea, partly because the sort of people who were in favour of it were the sort of people who ran the councils or formed most of the councils, and they thought, well, there'd be sensible people like us looking after this. It won't become silly or expensive or, well, it did, and they shouldn't have done it. But the idea then was, once these people were educated, they would see, even more so than they had before, they would see both in theory and in practice the whole point in the liberal order, and would be happy with it and would insist upon it and wouldn't let anyone depart from it. Well, of course, that didn't happen. Even bad theories have their consequences, and especially if they're taught in public schools, public-funded schools. So, those who argue for politics, as you're well aware, did so because these so-called rights, these equal natural rights, were the rights of a poor man and a rich man to dine at the Ritz. It was the right of a rich man or a poor man to sleep under a bridge. What kind of rights were these? These were mere negative rights, mere paper rights, mere legal rights. So it's the opportunity that counts. Well, no, of course, is what we libertarians think, not because we're libertarians, but because we think that way. That's why we are libertarians. We don't have, to come back to the basic values idea, we don't just cleave to these things because we like them. However, so politics is a destroyer of rights, yes, to a libertarian. Politics is a bringer of rights to an interventionist, of course. So, what of opportunity? This is a sort of way of trying to turn the argument at right angles and come at it another way. All right, if you're concerned about, if you think these mere negative rights are of no use, what about opportunity? Well, it's then entirely possible to argue, as a libertarian, with enough economics inside you, that opportunities will be maximised for all participants if there is a freely contracting, property-owning, securely owning society. That is what is argued. And I think correctly. From then on, the incomes will fall where they may. Civic rights, equality of, well, what are civic rights and legal rights and rights won through the ballot box? They are rights to be killed in a foreign war of the state's choosing, from my view. something of that kind. Not very good before, or after, or even during. Equality before the law, a very fine thing. But is there equality before the budget? Is there equality before the exchequer? Is there equality between the taxed and the subsidised? Is there equality between the licensed and the forbidden a licence? Well, come now. What kind of egalitarians are these? Is there equality for the governed and the governing? Where is the equality there? Well, we can all stand. We can all stand for Parliament, I presume, but not at the same time. No. Egalitarianism is the argument of a minority, usually the one that's doing rather well out of attempts to achieve it, always unsuccessful, which means you have to have further efforts in the future. So, if we're going to push the egalitarian line as a libertarian, and I think one can, in some ways, is to insist that there should be no aristocracy, no monarchy, although, and some libertarians have argued for this, for a monarchy, it's quite possible to have an aristocracy and a monarchy. After all, what is an aristocrat apart from someone who is someone's relative and with some property? What is a monarch? That's someone who is someone's known relative, proven relative. Very good. Well, these things can't be denied to people. You can't deny that they're relatives. You can't deny that they descend from such and such. So I can perfectly well see that under a libertarian, in a libertarian society, there might be a monarch. There would be Mrs. Windsor, the Queen, and she would be the Queen, or the King, or whatever it might be. And they would have...
She wouldn't be head of state.
No, not head of state. But they would be rather wealthy. They would be newsworthy, and their more attractive offspring would be newsworthy, and their sexual goings-on would be of interest, and they could cut tapes and open bridges and various other things. Why shouldn't they do this? They must have no power. No power at all. But there's no reason why they can't be a monarch.
The Liberal monarch will have to cut red tape.
Libertarian monarch. Yes, indeed. So, the leveller in me wants to argue for the egalitarian in me wants to argue against the aristocracy, an aristocracy with power. But not simply the aristocracy of birth, but the aristocracy of the ballot box. Why should usually a chap in a suit, moving from one part of a building to another, decide what I may or may not do under threat of law? Why should little bits of paper stuffed into a box determine what rights I have, or what rights I do not have? Away with such stuff. Election, I'm all in favour of election. Election is choice. And there should be choice. Choice of what to make, choice of what to price, choice of what to buy at that price. Freedom to associate. There is another view of these matters, a kind of Tory libertarian, although Hayek insisted that he wasn't a Tory, but there is a kind of view, an evolutionary view, and there's something in it, whereby animals, if the evolutionary record is examined, certain animals occupying the same kind of niche, in other words, hunting the same prey, living in the same environment, end up having a pretty similar body shape. If they fly, if they swim. And although it's no one's intention, but by a process of selection, as with firms, commercial models, tools, and the rest of it, as selected through the market process, in the same way, we end up having similar things. So a Tory might say, well, yes, but we've rubbed along, here we are with our ancient constitution, and these bits and pieces, and some of them look silly, but it works, doesn't it? If it didn't work, you wouldn't be here. And we're here, therefore it works. And we can't be too certain of what to change, lock bits off, or change things too rapidly, or even encourage the idea of rapid lopping and changing. And so a Tory might think, well, steady as you go, leave it pretty much as it is. It all seems to work, which is fair enough. I mean, it works because it hasn't attempted to abolish the market system. It's when the revolutionary changes are such that they do attempt to do without money prices or even money and go for a system of rationing and central planning, as we know, that fails utterly. So the Tory view of legal rights versus natural rights, a libertarian might talk about natural rights, or in the sense of evolved creatures, there's a natural reason why these things work compared to others, why this attribution of rights will work compared to others. The Tory view would be that, well, don't think about it, we're not that clever, just let it come. Let it come. And I think as regards jiggery-pokery in politics, that's probably true. But the wonderful thing about the level of a market order, here I can close, I think, as an egalitarian, although not one who insists or cares for equal incomes, equal rewards, I don't think people have equal abilities. I'm not equally concerned for the welfare of everyone. I do have some friends and relatives. However, I think I can call myself an egalitarian and a libertarian, and in many ways I'm a libertarian because I'm an egalitarian. And with that, I close.
Is there any questions or criticisms?
So.
Michael?
Thank you for the talk. I'm slightly surprised, at the talk from the subject, because when you started, you mentioned that someone else had thought that you're philosophically completely wrong with the idea, and I do tend to agree with that criticism. And in the main, I suppose, because possibly the most famous philosophical text on libertarianism is Nozick's Anarchy-State Utopia. And the second section of it is a really attack on this whole idea. You could have any pattern in society, and that pattern would include egalitarianism and be libertarian. And his argument is, with the Wilt Chamberlain very famous example, which I won't bother going into, but the idea is that to quote him, liberty upsets patterns. And by turning around and having a pattern of egalitarian, by the mere fact if this person sells something else to somebody else for £10, that person is £10 richer than that person, you would have to have the state interfere to take the £10 back from that person to give it to that person. What Nozick argues is, of course, is just easier to just ban the whole transaction in the first place, because otherwise it doesn't work. So I tend to feel this is a very powerful argument against egalitarianism, and I can't see how you can state I can be a libertarian and be egalitarian, because it just is against that whole, whole terms.
Yes, I have failed to make myself sufficiently clear. I don't care for the pattern. I care for the process that results from having equal rights to acquire property, transfer property, make use of your property, work with your property. It doesn't insist that the property that's transferred should be of equal sizes, or there should be some inheritance tax or something to make them more equal than they were before. No, none of that. So it's the property rights, and this is not the right to have property, but the right to acquire property and bequeath property, transfer property, change property. In that sense, I'm an egalitarian, but such an egalitarian that, of course, the state can't do a damn thing, or shouldn't do a damn thing, because they are supposing themselves to have rights that we do not have. We must not defraud, we must not intimidate, we must not attack, we must not thieve, and yet they, under other names, of course, policy, benefits, income, revenues, tax, of course we know they have different words for the things, but they remain the same. They would say, of course it isn't. Well, take tax, for example. Tax is theft. It is manifestly theft. It is agreed on all sides who the person is who has this income and who is to get it. It is not denied by the state that it comes from him and goes to there. If that is not, and there is force the threat of violence and imprisonment and other things to bring it about. Well, that's the part that I'm an egalitarian at. Well, they all have these rights, which I don't want, or none of us have these rights, which I do want, except legal redress for for damage or injury or invasion or such and such. But then again, that will be equal for all, equal right for recourse under law. So yes, I'm not interested in the pattern. It might be. You could have libertarians who rather like the idea of a society where things are more middling, like some of the Scandinavian countries apparently, that it might be more due to just being more like each other than not having great landed estates or very clever people and very ignorant people. I don't know. I'm not sure. But it's quite possible for a person to like one form of society and another, where there are less in the way of extremes. All right, you might like a pattern, but you can't insist upon it. You can't make policy. You can't use politics, theft, fraud, bullying, to do it. And there, I'm a libertarian. I'm an egalitarian only in not wishing to have an aristocracy of the ballot box, as I call it, an aristocracy of power. Either all have the right, or none have it. So in that sense, I'm an egalitarian. Now, Paul Coulomb said, don't use that word, because as soon as you bring in it, or that conception, it's liable to derail everything and send it off to one side. Well, maybe. I just thought I'd try it on, as it were, argue from that aspect, because some people will find that refreshing. And also they may not expect that of libertarians, that they argue for equality of rights, not equality of condition, equality of status, but not equality of wealth. That is a libertarian position.
Would you not say, that therefore you're just redefining the term egalitarianism? If you look at sort of, major academic thinkers on this, and most recently, say, the late Jerry Cohen, and his argument about what egalitarian is, which is probably the academically accepted view, you're just turning around and saying, well, I don't agree with all of this, and I'm going to take egalitarianism to mean something completely different to what the whole academia thinks it is. Therefore,
one is allowed to. Also, I think the French, liberté, fraternité, égalité, the égalité was no aristocracy, no special rights for the church. One vote for all, well, not all, but equal condition. I think that in that sense, I think egalitarianism can be thought of as equal status, not equal income, equal incomes, or it's better if they're more equal, and force should be used to make them more equal. Obviously I don't argue for that, and I don't think that's, in a sense, included in the package. And if it is, it might be a good thing for a libertarian to crack open the package and say, oh, no, it's not like that. Not as simple as that. I'm an egalitarian. You're a lover of the power elite versus the weak, the humble, the equal in status, but not equal in power. That's objectionable, and I object to it.
I have one question. Earlier in your speech, you spoke about the 16th century and voting, and you said that one of the advantages of the voting system back then was when people went to vote, they had to go into their local parish and sign the register.
I believe they did, yes.
And say how they voted. You said that was an advantage because you could bribe people and check.
Well, it was an advantage for those who wished to get elected. I only meant that.
Right. So
Although bribery goes on now, but it's called benefit or aid or regional aid or
promises made,
or promises or encouraging low carbon electricity production or something of that kind. Oh, there's all sorts of cronyiness and favouritism. Your favouritism can be a region. It can be a cause. It can be particular companies and particular persons, but it needn't be. So there's all sorts of favouritism, partiality by the state. That's why I said there is not equality before the exchequer. Some are taxed. Well, actually, they're not taxed equally for equal income because there'll be all sorts of offsets for this or that or the other. So there is not equality. Also, if some are subsidised and others are taxed, where then the equality? So you could push a libertarian, egalitarian angle. I'm not saying one should, but it does no harm to think about it.
Any more questions? Joe?
In ancient Egypt, obviously under feudalism, was everybody equally entitled to the position they were born into? My point is, it's very hard to get away from equality being either substantial or vacuous. Either you really are appealing to something very materialistic, or it's simply an add-on to say everybody is entitled to liberty, or everybody is entitled to the right to liberty, if you prefer. Seems plain enough. To throw in equally entitled just doesn't add anything, and it's in any.
It doesn't detract.
Detract, but as you said, maybe it has some rhetorical value.
Although it may confuse the issue, given.
But yeah, I think it's more like to confuse the issue or not than it's.
Any other contributions or arguments?
Supererogatory.
What did I say? Supererogatory?
Yes.
I also say.
They weren't necessarily rules, because it's an monarchy rule.
Ah.
So if you don't rule, you're not really a monarch. Though you could have a queen that isn't a monarch.
Yes.
I also invented.
There are quite a few
And
around.
only 7 minutes.
I also invented equilibration. I'm rather proud of that, inadvertently. Apparently, it's not a word. Any more? Have you stuffed in enough?
You've shut them up, Bob.
I'm sorry about that. Come on, have at me. I gave a version of this talk, vastly superior, insofar as it was 25 minutes long, a month or so ago. This is the improved one.
There wasn't many questions there, was there?
Well, there was one, actually.
Question.
Yes, good.
Throwing back to your reference to animals being of the same shape
Oh, yes, yes.
and nature in successful hunting. I was thinking there may be an occasion where, for instance, some hunters of a particular animal are other animals. Some may be insects, others may be snakes, and they may have the same prey, but they are vastly different in their structure.
Yes, but they may be alike in the structure of that kind of hunter.
Well, they may hunt in different ways. Some
Yeah, that's true, that's
line
true.
trap,
Yeah.
others chase, some just
True,
strangle,
true.
and so on. So there can be several different ways of achieving the same end.
Yes. I think I was making the point that there has to be enough of something, either de jure or de facto, of private property. There has to be de jure or de facto security of property. There has to be transfer of property. In the Soviet Union, they didn't have communism. There was a black market. There was private production. A great deal of the food was done by tiny plots, but looked after. But even the firms themselves actually bought from each other. It wasn't particularly efficient, but by the 30s and later, the general plan was drawn up after they found out what the factories were doing. It worked that way around. The plan didn't tell them what to do. The plan recorded what they were intending to do. And there was also all sorts of using what the plan gave you to make things that would actually sell for more and selling them on the side. So people would work a bit at the plan, and then so de facto there was private property. So in the same sense as the animals have a similar shape, a society with specialised production, and with specialised production that uses inputs from other specialist producers, it's like the same division of labour, a different way around. And with that kind of society, there has to be money, and there has to be private property of a kind. They have the right to do that with it, or no one's going to stop them doing that with this. And so in the Soviet Union, there was de facto private property, there was private production, there was exchange for money.
ruble. They printed the ruble all the way through.
And so, in the same way, I wouldn't say Hayek's a Hayek in this sense, in the bad sense. There are Tories who will say, so a society will come, if it's that advanced, it has private property, it has money, it has freedom of contract, sufficiently to hang together. And of course, that's true. And then those market societies, to come back to the pattern point, will look rather like each other. There will be out of town, in town, country, suburb,
Same sort of
city
tribes.
centre. Bits of the market will look very like bits of the market elsewhere in the world. Apart from the languages and the dress and the cuisine, things will have, in that sense, a pattern. And it's quite understandable why it would have that pattern. And this was stemmed from, well, not equal rights, sadly, and no, not, but at least roughly rights of that kind.
So,
Yeah, there's a
so
chap
what
at
you
the
seem
back.
to be talking about is convergent evolution, as it's called, but with
Yeah.
respect to culture. And there's a very, there seems to be some truth in it. There's a very interesting example of it, which was once thought to be indicative, because they didn't understand the convergent evolution, but indicative of originally of a one-world civilization. Is the fact that at various places in the world, apparently so far away from each other, we can't explain how they could have got to each other unless they had some kind of advanced transportation system. They had pyramids, pictograms, and
Spacemen.
and one other thing, which I forget.
Beef
the
burgers.
idea was all languages start as pictograms, and the pictograms had nothing to do with each other. If you want to build a building as tall as you possibly can without any known principles of architecture to speak of,
Pyramid.
a pyramid
Yeah.
shape. So the ziggurat in South America has got nothing to do with the pyramid. It's just that's the they wanted it to be as tall as possible, and that's the only way you could do it. I wish I could remember the third thing, but it's a very good example of apparently these
Yeah.
things are connected, but no, it's just what you have to do if these are stages you have to go through.
Oh, there's a chap at the back.
Yes, indeed. Trouble about.
I was just really going to comment on sort of the last thing you said before he spoke about all societies with market societies tending to look like each other. I've heard libertarians say, pulled out 10th, 11th century Iceland as a model of a libertarian society, and that was nothing at all like any other society.
Oh, perhaps, yes. I should have said market order societies look alike. Iceland was more of a stateless society, and Rothbard and others have made an island too, to some extent.
Yes, medieval island must pass.
Yeah, that's been sort of stateless. There hasn't been much of a market order. As your chairman here has pointed out in a talk on the Irish famine, it wasn't so much market failure or the harshness of the British or the British government. It was that the Irish grew food for themselves to eat. They didn't have roads much, canals much, rivers much. They didn't transport. There wasn't a food market.
There's a network system.
There wasn't a network system of making it somewhere and moving it somewhere else where it would be consumed. It was made where it would be consumed. And when the potato blight came, there was no easy means of getting food, even if food isn't needed. If you pay people to take it, they couldn't get it to where it was needed.
Same in
It's very
Ethiopia.
sad. Very sad.
The same in Ethiopia. Much later, in the 1980s, it was the same in Ethiopia. The food that was sent was rotted in the ports and couldn't be transported to where it was needed.
There's also inefficiency, corruption, and the rest of it.
Well, there was an army. There was a civil war going on in Ethiopia.
No, but even
the
Ethiopia-
army robbing the food. But the point is that most of the food rotted. It wasn't even robbed by the army.
Yeah. I believe in Ethiopia that people were being moved from when they worked the land and lived into elsewhere where they wouldn't help the rebels. Yeah.
Anyone else who got a point?
You've suffered enough.
I think the colleges are right, Bob, to say that there is a trade-off between equality and liberty, generally speaking, as most people think about it. And I think that, I suppose you're right that equal respect.
Who's doing the trade-off? If you're fussed about equality, but you rather like your liberty, if you exercise your liberty in a market order, there'll be inequality. And you have to lump it or say, well, I don't like it, but I'll put up with it if it means I can retain my liberty. In that sense, there's a trade-off, but nobody's making it. There's no overarching authority saying, oh, well, we'll trade off this inequality for this income. At the personal level, I don't think you can. Well, you can't trade it off. You can't, as the gentleman says, you can't dictate the pattern. You can't say who's going to. Very often, you're not fussed. If you buy a Harry Potter book, you don't know how many pennies are going to the author. I read one once, just to see what the fuss was about. But you can't. You cannot buy in such a way as to give all producers equal profits. Well, you don't, but also you can't. You don't know what you would have to charge. They may not know what you would have to charge before the event. After the event, they find out they shouldn't have been making that product. So there's all kinds of ways of being unequal, stemming from equal rights.
Of course, there is the point that Adam Smith made, which everyone who's in favour of equality tend to overlook, and that is that Adam Smith said the market makes for a long run equality, but it keeps getting cut off by short runs, changes in innovation, new inventions, changes in fashion and so on. And these short run equality, Smith said, tend to mean that levelling out, which is a market process, tends to be a levelling up rather than a levelling down. Because when the state does it, it levels everyone down. And so, as old Mrs. Thatcher said in her final speech, we can either have
it's not easy to do this with
down here, or we can have an inequality, and both sides are up here. But when we have the inequality, both classes, the lowest.
You raise the lower more,
with
more inequality.
But you see, in the very long run, prices do tend. The price system itself is a levelling out process, and so therefore, then you do have this long run move. This is exactly what has more or less destroyed the other stuff we've seen in the last 300 years. It has been the market more than the state that has destroyed them. Jan?
Well, you don't need to mention the long run. Insofar as you have a free market, you have as much equality as is compatible with efficiency. And if, at any particular time, assuming that it really is a free market, and if you were prepared to sacrifice that efficiency, then, everybody's going to be worse off quite quickly at a compound rate. So why? So, in that sense, exactly. I mean, I was going to make the point that David hadn't made, which I'm surprised he hadn't made it yet, which is that the inherent egalitarian tendency of the market, given the way that competition works, insofar as it is able to work, we don't know of any better way to promote equality combined with efficiency. Of course, if efficiency doesn't matter, you can just reduce everybody to beggary and put them all in dormitories and
Well, yes, you can wipe them all out and you have the equality of trade. Where's you going to make a point?
Yeah, it seems to me that a lot of the debate over the question of equality of rights or egalitarianism really is a form of proxy over whether or not we're talking about wealth or income. Because you can say, well, people basically, say that probably a functioning market economy, people probably earn more or less than they produce. And which of course is what libertarians tend to say. But on the other hand, if we're talking about wealth as opposed to income, the situation is different. If you have a large enough pile of money, you'll continue to get more and more wealthy, regardless of whether it produces anything at all.
Unless you're relying on interest.
Yes,
these
exactly.
days.
Exactly. So that then, therefore, as soon as you start visualising such a situation, you become more of an egalitarian and say, well, tax the bastards. Whereas if you actually visualising somebody working, then you're in favour of equality of rights as opposed to egalitarianism.
I've always come at it from the end of someone who isn't very clever, didn't really learn stuff that would be particularly useful for jobs, and I just thought, it's amazing. I don't know how to do this, how to do that, how to do the other. People that do it, and I'm far better off as a result. It's just wonderful stuff. And I'm complaining. Why should I complain, for goodness sakes? My real income keeps going up and up. I mean, there are those who have vast wealth, but what is their wealth? They own ships, harbours, factories. What do they do? Run them through their fingers at night with glee? No. They're producing stuff that people appreciate and make use of. The true good of it comes out in the product, and the product is consumed by not them, for the most part. And so, a Georgist might object that land is a bit different, because you don't actually do anything, it all just rolls in. And I can see how people might think that's a bit off. But on the other hand, don't start, and this is more like a sort of Tory view, don't start mucking around and thinking you can divide it up and re-divide it up and then argue about it and do it through politics, because there will be no end to who owns what where. And even if it's just land, and it won't be just land, it will soon be other things. So don't get fussed. The land is being put to use. The private property of other people does not hurt you. It sustains you. You have to have private property, it has to be exchanged, specialist production, and you're not hurt by vast estates somewhere, particularly. It can happen if they're owned by the state or if they fight wars against you. But generally speaking, the fact that someone is very wealthy simply means they have a lot of productive stuff, which is producing stuff that they don't use. Well, they're almost giving it away, aren't they? They produce all this output, but they don't even use it themselves. How kind, how generous. It's kind of a Bastiat view of matters. So I'm not so fussed about large estates and income rolling into the Duke of Westminster or wherever it might be. And this is more like a Tory view. Don't rock the boat. Don't start arguing about how to divide it up, because that would never end and it would make it worse than it is before. Nico?
Well, I think the market is doing this, dividing it and redistributing it.
Yes.
Because it always ends up, if someone cannot deal with capital, if someone cannot put it to productive use, he will use it up, and it will very quickly be in the hands of people who can use it. I mean, there are countless examples of people who have inherited ridiculous amounts of money from their parents who were very productive with it. Yes. And managed to blow it all in one lifetime, because they couldn't manage to do it. In order to get a return on your investment, you need to be clever enough to put capital into an area that is very productive and that serves people, essentially. And that's why I have absolutely no concern that we need an institution like a state or whatever to redistribute wealth. The market just is brilliantly. If you have ever seen an idiot who has inherited money trying to invest his capital and doesn't know what he's doing, you see how efficient the market is in getting capital out of the hands of people who have no idea what productivity is into the hands of people who know to deal with that.
I think the expression in Lancashire was clogs to clogs.
Yeah.
2 generations or 3 generations.
And there is another age which works wonderfully on the market. A fool needs money, are suing parties. They certainly are on the market. If you don't know how to look after money, you get. Of course, this is your point, though, has been reiterated by people who and as a justification for taxation, which you almost mentioned. But you see, what's wrong with taxation is what the government does with taxation. It doesn't only take taxation from society; it uses the money that it takes to mess society up, and that's the bad side of it. Jan?
Just an additional point, really. If you don't understand economics...
Sorry, let me help. Oh, exit. Out and turn left. Oh, I doubt that.
You have to go to Switzerland.
Oh, exit.
if one doesn't understand economics, then one is confronted by the brute fact of an awful lot of inequality in society.
Yes.
And there's a natural sort of presumption, which I think is ultimately even genetic, and I talked about this, you know, how we've evolved in tribes where it might have paid to be envious, and everybody's a close relative anyway, and so a more egalitarian. We have moral intuitions that have evolved to be fairly egalitarian, and we haven't shaken those off yet. So the only thing is that they don't understand economics. This is almost everybody. They perceive great inequality, and they have a natural inclination to think, maybe I'm being cheated, and then have some politician say to them, you are being cheated. And that's how...
But come to me and you'll be robbed.
And that's why you would think that if you make A-level economics compulsory for everybody,
it wouldn't
might alleviate the problem.
God knows what's in A-level economics. I don't know.
No, A-level economics. O-level economics. Don't make Keynes compulsory. A-level, you get just Keynes. This is how wonderful the state is.
In the USSR, you would have had Marx. You would have had economics would have been Marx. So, but seriously, it's true.
Marx is better
we
than
do know
Keynes.
that from surveys that economists are far more likely to be pro-free market than non-economists. Even the worst of them.
Yes, that's true. That's true.
Yeah.
Friedman is good on free trade.
Yes,
Exactly.
So, do you want to come back and push your taxation point?
Oh, you didn't have a taxation point, did you?
Oh, yes, you did mention it.
Well, I was. I mean, I see that really the unexamined issue behind everything is whether or not you focus upon income or wealth. Because if you purely focus on people's income, then you can just say totally unregulated markets, don't worry, everybody will get what they deserve. If you ignore the wealth factor. Whereas Marxists, of course, go the completely other way. They actually ignore income as a factor, really, the inequalities of income, and they purely look on accumulations of wealth. And so therefore they become total statists. I'm not necessarily taking a position on that spectrum. I'm just saying that is the spectrum. And people very rarely...
I mean, they think there's an option for a non-capitalist society. As the speaker pointed out, even the USSR wasn't a non-capitalist society.
We tried it for a while. So-called war communism, and that was a disaster.
Yes.
But even through that, it printed
I
ruble.
totally take your point, but that's not...
No, I understand.
But yeah, I totally take that point.
Is there any other questions?
We're done?
You okay, Bob?
Yes, that's it.
Well, thank you very much indeed for coming, and I'd like to give the speaker a round of applause for going into the lion's den with equality in a libertarian meeting.